B and case from Mr. C, I will string them together. That is what is called a case series. Ecological studies and cross-sectional studies are similar, yet different. Ecological studies are observational studies where the unit of observation is a group. In contrast with cross-sectional studies, the unit of observation is an individual. But both cross-sectional and ecological studies are studies where the exposure and the outcome are both captured at the same time. So we say they're captured in the same snapshot in time. The remaining 4 studies up here are what we call analytic studies, right? The ones at the bottom here, from cross-sectional downwards, are descriptive epidemiology. The ones up here, the 4 up here, case control studies, cohort studies, and randomized trial. Of course, cohort studies are, you have both prospective and retrospective, are analytical. And we call them analytical or comparative studies because in these studies, we have groups we're comparing, like an exposed versus non-exposed, or a case versus a control, or a treated versus an untreated group. So because we're comparing 2 groups explicitly, that's why we call them comparative or analytical. And I'm sure you're wondering, what does any of this have to do with longitudinal studies? Well, a lot, because in this design, some of them involve a longitudinal design and some do not. So it's important for us, first of all, step back and understand the kind of studies that exist before we can then dive into the basics of which ones are longitudinal and which ones are not. It's also important for us to understand some of the key terms in study design or outcome measurements. So this is a very good summary of what all of those terms mean. So if you imagine the tap running into this basin, right? The water collected here is the prevalence. So prevalence is all the water that is already in the bowl plus the new water coming in here, right? That's what makes up prevalence. Incidence is just these new drops of water falling, right? So incidence refers to new cases. Again, these concepts are very intimately tied with the concept of longitudinal studies, so we need to understand them clearly. So prevalence is old and new cases combined together, all the water in this bowl, old and new. Incidence is just the new ones coming out of the tap. That's the incidence. Now, sometimes people leave the pool of existing cases and then come back. Imagine somebody who has been healed from cancer or who has had the cancer remission and then is, begins to have, recurrence of cancer again, right? He left the pool briefly, but then he came right back. We call that recurrence. And so it's different from incidence because this is brand new cases that have never existed before. These are new in the context that they're coming back again, but they were previously in that pool. They just left and came back. So this is recurrence. Remission is where people leave the pool, right? So think of somebody who has been, you have, let's say you're looking at tuberculosis, somebody who has been healed and cured. He has left the pool of people with a condition. So that's remission. And then sometimes people die and never to return, right? And so that is mortality. And so we need to understand all of these concepts in the context of longitudinal studies because these are some of the things that we measure. So if we go back to the previous chart we looked at, some of the studies can only capture certain things. So for example, cross-sectional studies can only capture prevalence, right? And so that's the limitation of these ones here. You cannot capture incidence, which is new cases, with the cross-sectional because remember that both the exposure and the outcome are measured at just one point in time. Longitudinal studies are great because they allow us to capture incidence. So that is the only kind of study where we can capture incidence, which is new cases, right? And that is why longitudinal studies become very important. If we're also interested in looking at things like mortality or remission or recurrence, all of these things are time varying. If you're talking about recurrence, that means that, well, you watch this guy leave the pool and then come back into the pool. So you can see there's an element of time involved there. And that's why it's also inherently tied with longitudinal design. The same thing with remission. You watch the guy with the disease and then you watched him leave that pool. Again, so these are concepts that we need to understand in the concept of longitudinal designs. Now let's bring in some mathematical equation that will tie in some of these very two important key elements here, which was incidence and prevalence. These two, they are distinct terms, but they're related mathematically. So prevalence, which is the total number of cases, which is all the water in the pool, is equals to the incidence times the duration, right? So if we know, for example, what the prevalence is, and we know the duration of the illness, we can calculate incidence. Or if we know the incidence and we know how long the disease lasts, duration of the illness, we can also calculate prevalence. So, so we can connect those two concepts together with this equation. So this is another way of framing what we just discussed. This is just a single slide description of all these two or three previous slides in one. And this is just a summary of epidemiology, what epidemiology is, or the kind of studies that we have in epidemiology. So we first of all start by asking, are groups being compared by exposure status? In other words, are we comparing two or more groups together? If the answer is no, then that study is automatically descriptive. So if we go back to that previous screen, all of the studies here from cross-sectional below, there are no two or more groups that we're comparing in terms of exposure or non-exposed or treated or non-treated. So that's why all of the studies at the bottom here are descriptive, whereas all these ones up here are analytical because we're comparing two or more groups. So that's where we start. We start by asking, are we comparing groups by exposure status? Now, if the answer is yes, we are comparing groups, that means that study is analytical. So the next question we have to ask is, did the investigators assign people into the study groups? So we say, sure, we're comparing people exposed or non-exposed. Who made the assignment? Who assigned people? Was it the investigator or was it nature or nurture? Sometimes the assignment is done by God, maybe where you were born, right? If we're looking at, for example, the association between place of birth and mortality. Well, nobody assigned you. The investigator did not assign you to be born in that place. That assignment was done by nature, right? So in that case, since it was not the investigator that assigned you, we say that, well, it's observational. The investigator just met you there. They just came and observed you there. And so we call it observational. Sometimes the assignment is not even done by nature. It's done by nurture, by ourselves. So imagine a study looking at the association between obesity and mortality. So you are comparing people who are obese versus non-obese. Again, the investigator is not the one assigning you to become obese or not to be obese. You made the assignment yourself by your life choices, right? So again, the investigator just met you that way. So again, this study is observational. So there are only three forces that can assign people into study groups: nature, nurture, or the investigator. So when the assignment is done by nature or by nurture, which is yourself, or lifestyle or environmental factors, we call that an observational study. So it's analytical, but observational. It's observational because the investigator is just observing, they're not intervening. But when the investigator steps in and we've had people start drawing things on this board again. So please, I don't know how that mechanism occurs, but please, if we can avoid drawing things, that would be great. On the other hand, if the investigator is the one that assigned treatment, we call this interventional. And interventional because, as the name implies, you are intervening. You are not just observing. You actually came in and stepped in and say, hey, I am actually going to intervene and assign you to this group and assign you to that group. So interventional studies are also called experiments. So an experiment is an interventional study and vice versa. Now, if the study was interventional, the next question we have to ask is, was the assignment at random? Did the investigator assign treatment at random or was it non-random? If it's random, we call it a randomized experiment or a randomized trial. If it was not at random, we call it non-randomized trial, right? And so that provides a framework for us to better understand what longitudinal studies are. Again, this is just a summary of what we've said so that we are all on the same page, highlighting or contrasting some of the studies we discussed. This is the contrast between cross-sectional and longitudinal and ecological studies. Both are observational, both are descriptive, right? The difference between them is that in the case of cross-sectional, individuals are the ones providing answers to the questionnaires or providing the data. For ecological studies, the unit of analysis is populations or groups of people, not necessarily individuals. And that's why here we talk about a very, very important type of bias. I'm sure you've heard of the word ecological fallacy or ecological bias. It comes from this study design. In other words, you make inferences, you study individuals, but you make inferences to the group, right? We also call that stereotyping. Another simple name for ecological bias or ecological fallacy. The lay term is for it is stereotyping. Someone might say, oh, wow, all people from a certain region are all Nigerians are 419ers. Like, okay, you studied what's one, and then you've generalized your result to everybody. So ecological fallacy or ecological bias is stereotyping. It is when we study individuals, but instead of making inferences at the level of individuals, we generalize our results to the level of groups, right? So if you study individuals, you should make your inferences only at the level of individuals. If you study groups, you should make your inferences only at the level of groups. Don't study individuals and then make inferences to groups, because that is stereotyping or ecological bias. And don't study groups and make inferences to an individual, because again, that might be overgeneralization of the results. All right. So what are some of the pros and cons of the two designs? Cross-sectional, which is one snapshot in time, and longitudinal, where you have several data collections on the same individuals over time. Well, it depends on the context. Sometimes you just want something simple, and so might use a cross-sectional study, which is just a snapshot. You can think of this as just a photograph, whereas a longitudinal study is like a video where you have streams of snapshots all bound together. Now, there's no epidemiologic study called longitudinal studies. So let's be very clear. There's no such study design in epidemiology called longitudinal. Longitudinal study is just a basket of studies that all involve data collection over time. So it won't make much sense for you to just say, oh, our study design was longitudinal. It's like, okay, you've not really told us much. Like, longitudinal just tells us that data collection was occurring over time, but you still have to tell us what kind of design it was. So these are the 4 studies that we group together and loosely call longitudinal studies, because all 4 of them involve elements of time. We're collecting data over time. So let's start with prospective cohort studies. Cohort studies, remember we said, are studies where we have, we're following exposed and non-exposed individuals who are disease-free at baseline, and we're following them over time to see how the rate of developing the outcome differs between the two groups, right? So you can see that we started with folks who were disease-free, and we follow them over time. The word cohort studies comes from the Roman cohorts. So the Roman soldiers were organized into groups called cohorts. And so each cohort was stuck together for life, and they would travel all these long distances fighting the wars for Rome, right? So that comes from the idea that you have with people who are alive and well, and then you follow them over time, and then they all died, well, or developed the outcome of interest. So again, the point here is that prospective cohort studies involve following people over time. The same thing applies with randomized control trials. They're also longitudinal because, and are very similar. The only difference between this and this is that here, we met these guys as exposed or non-exposed. Here, we assign them into treatment. But the same thing occurs. We then follow them over time to see how the particular outcome, whatever the outcome is, differs between the two groups. And then we also have what we call case registries. So if you remember, we talked about case studies and case series. Sometimes we have people who have a disease and we want to follow them over time to see how the disease progresses. So for example, during Ebola, we had folks who had survived Ebola, and we grouped them. We initiated them into this registry so that every year we go back to them and we see what new symptoms do you have? What of your old symptoms are they gone, right? So in this case, these are cases or individuals who are linked together by a common thing. Maybe they all survived Ebola, and we're following them over time. So it's a registry. And so that obviously is also longitudinal because we go back to them time and time again to see how the natural history of the disease is changing over time. And then lastly, we have panel data. Panels are people who have volunteered to do a study. And so unlike cohort studies where you have clear exposed and non-exposed, a panel could just be, I could say everybody in this group, you are all part of my panel. And every week, I'm just going to follow up with you and say, how are you feeling? How did you enjoy the class last week? And so this data collection is ongoing, right? It's longitudinal because I'm coming back to the same individuals to collect data. But unlike cohort studies, it's not as if there's a clear distinction between people who are exposed or non-exposed. It's just, just a bunch of people, random people who I'm following back over time to see whatever outcomes of interest I'm interested in capturing. So the bottom line I'm trying to make here on this screen is that saying your study is longitudinal does not give us enough context, because longitudinal simply means that the study involves follow-up over time. So after you have told us longitudinal, you now have to tell us the kind of design it is, because it's longitudinal in of itself is not a study design. So why do we do longitudinal studies? Again, it's because that they address certain threats to validity, and so they allow us to make stronger inferences. And so think of cross-sectional studies as hypothesis generating, but then more valid studies like clinical trials are hypothesis confirming, because they address many of the threats to validity, especially temporality bias, which is how do you know that the exposure happened before the outcome, right? Is the chicken and the egg? Did the egg come before the chicken, or did the chicken come before the egg? We don't know. The only way we can know is we start with the people who are exposed, and then we follow them over time, right? So you can see why longitudinal studies are very important in study design. So we talked about threats to validity. So let's quickly describe them and explain what they are. We talked about internal and external validity. Again, we need to understand these concepts because they are very integral to why we do longitudinal studies. So if you're designing a study for a grant, for example, and you are going to say, okay, we're going to use this design, it's helpful to provide justification for why you are using that design, right? And also for the strengths of your study, you can explain why your study overcomes certain threats to validity, both internal and external. So let's talk about internal validity first. So let's illustrate it with, you are trying to marry someone, right? It's like, okay, oh, I love this person so much, I want us to get married. It's like, okay, but first, let us do some tests. Let's make sure that we're compatible. Like, I want to have children. Do you want to have children? Okay, let's go and do some tests to make sure that there's no issues of resource incompatibility, and that that do you have an STD? Do you have some conditions that I need to be aware of, right? Let's go and do some tests. This is internal validity. This is like trying to make sure that internally everything is kosher, that everything is fine. Like, do you have a family history of madness that I have to be aware of, right? So this is just between you and this person, trying to figure that everything is fine. Now you've done all of that and everything is kosher, nothing is bad, and you're like, okay, now having made sure that everything is good, now let's go and meet the family. Let's make sure that you are acceptable to the family. So, right. So you now go to the external family and say, hey, this person is somebody I want to marry. Do you guys approve? They're like, yeah. They said no, whatever, right? But that's the point. So in internal validity, it is just internally to the study, right? Are there things we should be concerned about internally, right? So things like bias, is there confounding bias, and how do we control for it? Is there selection bias, and how do we control for it? Is there measurement bias internally to the study, right? So it's the truth within the study, right? We're not concerned about external issues yet. It's just within the study, is there truth? Once we've confirmed there's internal validity, then we can say, all right, the results from this study, are they generalizable to the broader population? So if we say that this result or this findings showed X, Y, and Z, is that something that is generalizable to the broader population from which the participants came? So again, we need to know this because it's possible that we can have internal validity, but no external validity. It's possible that we can have both absence of internal and external validity. So both could exist, both could be missing, one could be present. It's possible that, oh, this person has a family history of madness, but like, oh, but the family loves them. It's possible that it could be perfect individuals, but the family still does not like them, right? So you can have internal validity present and external validity present. You can have internal validity present, but external validity is not present, and so on and so forth. So we need to understand these things so we can describe our studies better. This is just reinforcing what I said earlier, that internal validity has to do with how free is our study from confounding bias, measurement bias, and selection bias. And then external validity means how can we generalize results from our study to the broader population. The cross-sectional studies have, very weak internal validity, but for large representative surveys, they have very high external validity. Randomized trials, on the other hand, have very low internal validity, very low external validity, because we recruit clinical trial participants as volunteers. So most clinical trials are made up of volunteers. So that is why you can imagine the results are not very generalizable from those participants to the rest of the population. But internal validity is very, very high for clinical trials because we are randomizing. And so the bottom line is that we need to understand why we do longitudinal studies, and how does this affect internal validity. So these are some of the questions we need to be thinking about when we design studies. So it's not just saying, oh, well, longitudinal study sounds fancy, so I'm going to do it. No, what are you gaining from doing it? So you can say, well, it better allows me to measure the temporality, that the exposure indeed came before the outcome. And so there's no confounding by time, right? So it improves internal validity. Now, the generalizability is a different question entirely, but again, it's important for us to know those things very clearly. Again, some of the study designs are longitudinal and some are not. A confusion arises typically between prospective cohort studies, retrospective cohort studies, and case control studies. Of course, of those three, only prospective is longitudinal. As the name implies, prospective, we're looking forward. So prospective is longitudinal, retrospective cohort studies and case control studies are not longitudinal. So this is a common error you see in the literature. People will say a longitudinal retrospective cohort. Like, okay, that does not even make any sense. So we need to understand what those things mean. So let's illustrate this with a chef. A chef is cooking you a very fantastic dish. And so, of course, the ingredients are the exposure. The chef has to gather a whole bunch of ingredients, chicken broth and onions and celery and whatever, to make this dish. So in all three cases, the ingredients come before the dish. Obviously, you need to have the ingredients before you can create a dish. So in prospective cohort studies, the ingredients come before the dish. The same applies to retrospective cohorts and case control. So in other words, in all three cases, exposure must come before the outcome. What differs from all three is where we, the investigator, came into the picture. In prospective cohort studies, that's like we were there with the chef right at the beginning when they were mixing the ingredients and doing all of this stuff. We watched them do that. We saw how this chef mixed the onions and the celery and the carrots and how the dish was eventually formed, right? So it's prospective because we followed this guy over time and we saw how everything came together. And that's why we call it prospective. And so the advantage of this is that this is not secondhand information. We were there. So because it's not secondhand information, the likelihood of errors in measurement are very, very minimized. So that is the beauty of longitudinal studies. We were there, in prospective cohort studies, we saw how these guys were exposed and we followed them. We saw when they had the disease and when they did not. So that's prospective. In retrospective cohort studies, the chef came and did his thing and created a dish. Unfortunately, we came after the dish was cooked. But the good news is that we had a video recorder there, and so that captured every single thing. So the video recorder captured how this chef mixed everything. And so when we come back, all we have to do is go back and watch the whole thing. So that's why it's called retrospective, because we're going back in time, but we are now watching this thing, So retrospective cohort studies allows us to create a virtual reality where we go back in time as though we were there at the beginning. So we watch records, we gather, documents and other, trails of evidence that existed so that we can reconstruct the storyline from exposure to the outcome. And then for case control studies, again, we came after the whole show was over, but this time around, we don't have any recording. So what we have to do is we have to break down this dish apart and say, this looks like an onion. So I think this guy put an onion in here, right? So we're trying to piece together, to create a narrative from the dish. not from the exposure, because that is what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out, I have this dish. I have to now reverse engineer this dish and figure out what went into it. So that's what a case control study is. We start with the outcome, and we're trying to figure out what the exposure was. So again, just to reemphasize that of those 3 studies, only prospective cohort studies are longitudinal. So when we're writing, we really don't want to confuse the term longitudinal with study designs that have nothing to do with longitudinal design. All right, so now this is I've been talking, so this is your time to this is the pop quiz now to test whether you guys have been following along all we've discussed so far. So a new treatment reduces the average duration of an illness, but does not affect the number of new cases or the number of people dying of a disease. The treatment will therefore what? Is it A, B, C, or D? You can type your answer into the chat box. Let's see. How do I see these answers? Okay, great. Oh, no answers. So, so again, remember I said the formula for prevalence is equal to incidence times duration. So prevalence is incidence times duration. So I'm just testing your knowledge of that formula. So if prevalence is incidence times duration, you are told that the disease reduces the average duration of an illness, but has no impact on incidence. So prevalence is incidence times duration. If it reduces duration, but has no impact on the incidence, what will be the result of that product? Remembering that prevalence is incidence times duration. Okay. Exactly. It will reduce prevalence, right? And the calculation for that should be obvious. If we have 10 equals, A equals B times C, if B or C changes, obviously, A will change. So since prevalence is incidence times duration, if we reduce the duration, we'll reduce prevalence. If we reduce the incidence, it will reduce prevalence. If we reduce both the incidence and the duration, it will still reduce. So this is important because when you design interventions, you should be able to predict which way it's going to go, right? And this is the whole idea behind what we say, provide hypothesis for your study. Like, what direction do you think this study will go? You should be able to say that, okay, this intervention I'm creating, I know it's going to reduce the duration of the illness, or it's going to reduce the incidence. And so based on that, I can mathematically guess that prevalence will be reduced. All right, quiz number 2. The time sequence of temporality is one of the causal criteria by Hills, the Hills criteria. Of the following study designs, which is best for establishing temporality? So in other words, I'm simply asking you, which of the study designs has a longitudinal component? Exactly, cohort. That is absolutely correct. Which of the following designs is least useful for making a judgment about causality? So in other words, I'm asking you, which study design here does not involve a component of longitudinal design and hence cannot address issues of the timing or the interval between exposure and outcome? Excellent. That's a cross-sectional design. Which of the following research methods studies only people who are initially free of a disease of interest? So again, remember that there's no study design called longitudinal. So if we're talking about longitudinal studies, you need to know the different studies that make up longitudinal studies. Okay. So it can be a case control study because the case means people who have disease. So we're literally starting with people who have the disease, right? A case series means that we have people who are cases and we have a whole bunch of them. So obviously it cannot be individuals who are disease-free because they already have the disease. That's why we are following, that's why we collected them together and trying to study them. That's a case series. It cannot be a cross-sectional study because we're measuring both exposure and the outcome at the same time. So there's no element of time. So the idea of people being initially free does not apply in a cross-sectional study because everything takes place at the same time. So the only answer here is cohort study, right? Remember that in the Roman cohorts, these were healthy soldiers who left Rome alive and well. They went on their battles and they all died, right? So here in cohort studies, we start with people who are alive and well, right? The only thing that is different between them is exposed versus non-exposed. We follow them over time to see which individuals develop the outcome, whether it's death or whatever other outcome of interest. So it's cohort study. This is also testing your understanding of the formula. Prevalence is equal to incidence times duration. Suppose a highly effective public health program is implementing for preventing tooth decay in children. Which of the following will be a suitable outcome for real-world evaluation? So it's essentially trying to see how can you best decide which indicator to use. When do you use prevalence? When do you use incidence? So, okay. So remember that we have a new intervention, right? We don't want to compare apples and oranges. If we have new wine, we have to put it in new glasses. If we have old wine, we can put it in old glasses. If we have a new intervention, we want to test it with new cases, right? Because if you say you're going to look at new and old cases, how do you then distinguish which ones were new, which ones were old? So the only answer here is incidence. You're going to look at incidence of new cases because you want to really see, test intervention. So all I'm trying to say is that you need to know when to use particular study designs. Like, when do I use a cross-sectional study? When do I use a longitudinal study? And if I'm going to use a longitudinal study, what kind of longitudinal study should I use? These are things that, that you should be able to do. And these are things that AI cannot do for you, right? So people always worry that, oh, AI is going to come and take over research. No. The investigator, is still your job to figure out all of these intellectual components of the study, and then you can then execute the study. So without doing all of these decision makings for your study, the study might end up being very poor in terms of the quality of evidence. All right, so let's look at the case study. So let's say we have Tara here. Tara is from University of Jos, and I'm not sure whether it's he or she wants to look at the study looking at the relationship between ChatGPT usage and long-term academic performance among college students or undergraduates. Okay, he plans to recruit first-year undergraduate students and to conduct a follow-up annual survey over the next 4 years on the same individuals till they graduate from college or from university. He's going to collect detailed information on frequency and duration of ChatGPT usage to determine exposure status. Over the next 4 years, Tara will meticulously track their cognitive skills and writing abilities and their study habits. What kind of study is this? Yes, this is a cohort study because we're starting with individuals at baseline. We don't know their academic performance yet. So the academic performance is a future event. We have exposure status. This is exposed or non-exposed individuals who use. Please, I don't want to see anybody writing longitudinal. Longitudinal is not a design. Cohort studies prospective cohort studies are always longitudinal. So you don't need to say prospective or longitudinal prospective cohort study. It's like, so let's establish what we should never say. We should never say a prospective or a longitudinal prospective cohort study. That doesn't make sense because the word prospective already means longitudinal. So you can just simply say it's a prospective cohort, right? Don't ever say a longitudinal retrospective cohort study. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Longitudinal is reserved for prospective studies only, right? And so let's see how we can design the study. So that's what we're trying to achieve now. So now that we know what we're trying to achieve, we know that this is a longitudinal study. We want to collect information over individuals annually. So the question is, how do we then design the study on the Chisquares platform? So that's what we're going to do hands-on now. I do not know, Lungile, should we do the demo and then ask questions, or do you want to take questions now that are related to the lecture first?
Let's do the demo, sir, please.
Okay, all right, sure, sounds good. All right, so this is a short survey I've put together for our investigation here. It's the association between exposure to ChatGPT and academic performance among college students. So this is our questionnaire. It's just meant for demonstration purposes. So please, you should understand that it's not meant to answer the research question comprehensively. But what we want to do today is two things. So the first question is just about, what is your current educational enrollment status? Then you have all of them. The goal is that we are only interested in, at baseline, to capture only individuals who are first-year college students. So we want to be able to restrict the entry to only individuals who are in first year, because that is the research question. The research question is, if we included individuals at baseline and follow them over time, how does exposure to ChatGPT influence academic performance? So we want to be mindful of that when we design the study. And then the next question asks about whether the individuals have ever heard of ChatGPT. Ideally, we want to set up a skip pattern. If the individual has never heard of ChatGPT, then we don't necessarily have to ask them, how have you used ChatGPT in the past? So this question is trying to assess it's part of the exposure question. So individuals who say no will be classified as never been exposed to ChatGPT, and individuals who say yes will be classified as being exposed, right? But this is a very crude level of exposure. Just saying yes or no doesn't really give us some nuance. So we want to be able to measure the frequency, the duration of exposure. So this is why the next questions are here. So if individual says no, we will then route them to the end of this question here. No, sorry, this one. On average, how would you say your grades in the last academic session were? Mostly which letter grades? So these questions are only for individuals who have reported here that they use ChatGPT. The next question is allowing us to measure the kinds of things that people who said they use ChatGPT use it for. So say, which of the following ways have you used ChatGPT in the past 12 months? So writing academic essays and doing citations and references and so on and so forth. And this is a matrix question. They can select the frequency with which they indicate that they've used it in the past. And then here we're trying to measure the intensity of usage. On average, how much time do you spend on ChatGPT each day? Enter a number, then select the unit. So they can enter a number like 6 or whatever number is, and then select whether is it 6 seconds or 6 minutes or 6 hours. That's what the question is trying to assess. So it's trying to capture intensity of use. And here we're trying to see which area they're using it for. Is it academic performance? It's a very broad term. So what part of academia are we looking at? Are they using it in math or English? Because surely ChatGPT may be appropriate for some uses, but maybe not for some others. So the question is, in the past term or academic session, which of the following courses or subjects have you used ChatGPT for? And then those are the ones here. There are options for them to also specify any other one that they want, and then none of the above. And then the duration. It's always a good idea to capture both intensity and duration. And you can then use those to calculate exposure. So saying exposure is just yes or no is very, very shallow. So in this case, since it's self-reported exposure, the questionnaire is trying to make sure that we have enough indicators that will allow us to look at intensity of use as well as duration of use. And we can then maybe combine those two to look at overall exposure to come up with a metric for overall exposure that allows us to examine dose response so that we can see, as exposure increases, does the academic performance increase or does it decrease? And then here we have the outcome. On average, will you see your grades in the last academic session were mostly which letter grades? A, B, C, D, E, F, and other. And then we are also trying to at least have some valid way of capturing their outcome. So we ask them, hey, just give us your transcript for the last academic year so that we can at least objectively also evaluate and capture data from that transcript as well. So this is just a quick questionnaire just put together. Again, the goal is not to look at the intricacies and the issues of validity, but just to demonstrate how we can set up that kind of study on the Chisquares platform. Now, last week we looked at how we could import a questionnaire with Excel. So today we want to look at something a bit different. How do we import a questionnaire in Microsoft Word onto the Chisquares platform and then set it up? Here, our questionnaire is already in Microsoft Word, so that makes sense. That's a very valid question. How do we import this questionnaire as it is into the platform? So there are some rules that are supposed to guide you in doing that import. Let me quickly show you that. Okay. So when you're importing your questionnaire from Microsoft Word, you can. This is the web page. There's guidance here. You can always download this guidance. Let me drop the link here for you guys. If I can find. Okay, great. Find it. So that's the link. So this gives you some guidance. So the point is that you have to format the questionnaire properly so that the platform knows, where a question ends and where the next one begins, or where an answer option ends and where the next one begins. Now, the good news is that we've tried to make it very simple so that it's very intuitive. The whole concept is Q and A, questions and answers. So things that are question terms will start with Q, and things that are answers will start with A, right? But then we've also provided you with a lot of flexibility to customize what kind of questions it is. So add Q, so you have to provide these elements in front of questions and these ones in front of answers. Add A in front of answers, and then everything ends with 3 hashtags. It sounds complex, but what we'll do is going to find it's very simple. And so for example, this is how a question is framed here. When was the last time you used lorem ipsum in your design work? Please select one answer below. So you can see that the question starts with at Q and ends with 3 hashtags. And then each of the answers starts with at A. So this tells us this is an answer. And each of the answers also end with 3 hashtags. So that's what we're trying to do now. We're going to just quickly do that. The easiest way to do this is just to copy the whole questionnaire into Excel and just format it so that it's easier to work with it there. So what I'm doing now is I've copied the whole thing into Excel. I'm going to paste it in Excel here. Let me maximize the screen. If you're a researcher, it's a very good idea to learn how to use Excel. Excel is just a lifesaver. So I'm going to put everything as at A at the beginning. I'm going to format it later. And then everything ends with 3 hashtags. So I'm going to apply everything here. And I'm going to apply everything here. Oops. And then these ones that are out here, let me just insert. Let me copy them so that everything is on one line. I'll paste them in a transposed manner so that they're all on one line. So I don't need this anymore. All right, so that's all I'm doing here. And then I will just paste them with an Excel formula like this. Oops. Sorry. So it goes to this and this and last one here. So I can then apply this globally, right? So that's it. I can then come here and change back to Word here and paste that same thing here. And that's the formatting here. Let me remove these ones that are not needed. Find and replace. Find this and replace with nothing. So I just now have to make some changes to the title. The title starts with the word T. So instead of add at A, I'll call it add at T. This is not a question. This is just information. So this will be at I for information. So T for title, I for information. Then questions. We'll just have to make sure we change the questions to Q from A. So instead of at A, this will be Q. What is your current enrollment status? This is the answers. The next question, change it to Q. Again, Q and A. And then next one here to change it to Q. Which of the following ways have you used ChatGPT in the past 12 months? And so let's see. And then, okay, let's remove the space. So these are the different ways they've used ChatGPT. Now, the different ways, since they are questions, they are minor questions. So we'll put them the different ways as Q. This is a matrix question, remember? So we have the answers and then the question. So again, I've dropped the link to the instructions, which clearly show you how to format each of the question types. And then the next question is, on average, how much time do you spend on ChatGPT? Here, we're expecting them to provide a number. So this is a question that requires a number with general represented number with the hashtag. So they're supposed to provide a number. So just putting this hashtag allows the system to know that this is a question that they're going to put a number, and then they can select the units of measurements. Then next one is also question. Changes to Q for question. In the past term academic session, which of the following subjects have you used ChatGPT for? This is select all that apply. That means they can select more than one question. And since more than one answer rather. And so since they can select more than one answer, let's just put a plus to indicate that multiple answers are allowed. Then how long have you been using ChatGPT for any applications or purposes? Again, this is going to change it to question. And we're going to put hashtag because, again, they're supposed to provide an answer there. And the next question, on average, would you say that we have to change this A to Q for questions? And then this one, please upload a copy of your results sheets. Since they're uploading, this is the question. Upload is the caret symbol. This kind of looks like it's looking up, like uploading something. So that's how you can indicate to the system that it's an upload question. So that's how we format our questionnaire. So I'm going to save this and we can then import it into the platform. So again, this is how you can, if you have your questionnaire in Microsoft Word already, this is how you can format it. So if we did all right, we should have no problem, but we're going to see that in a second. Let's save this. Let's call this performance word questionnaire. All right, now let's create our questionnaire on the platform and then import what we just created there. So let's log in. And for those who are new to the platform, you can access the Chisquares platform from this. Just find your institution. Let me just share the link in case of, for those of you who may not have access. Let's copy the link and drop it here. So again, look for your institution and copy the link from there. And that's how you can access the platform. All right, let's go back to our agenda. So let's create a survey design and let's start a new study. The title of the survey is, let's copy the survey title. We just need that only. The association between exposure to ChatGPT, academic performance among college students. The location of the participants, can leave it blank if you're not sure what that is. The aims, we can ask our AI to suggest aims for us, the aims for the study. Every research study should have aims. And so let's have that suggested for us. So what it does, it takes the context of a study and it has suggested these aims to analyze the association between ChatGPT exposure and academic efficacy. So I'm going to select just a couple of them so that we can proceed. I'll clear the remaining ones away. The keywords, I'm going to ask AI to also suggest those for me. I'll select ChatGPT and let's say college students and clear the remaining ones away. And then let's create new project. This is a collaborative platform, which means that you can have multiple people who are working on the same project together. If I want to invite a collaborator, I just provide their emails and assign them a role. Let's say I want them to be a co-author or whatever the role might be. You can add as many collaborators as possible, but for now, I will just save and continue. So now we have our study set up, at least the skeletal framework set up. Let's upload the questionnaire we just created. There are 6 ways to import a questionnaire. We are going to use import from Word. We select that option. You can download the instructions here if you're not sure how to format it. And you can also look at a sample questionnaire that is already formatted from here. If you want some guidance. We've already done this, so I don't need all of those things. I just click here, choose a file. So allow me to select the file that I want. So let's go to the documents here we have. This is the Word questionnaire. See, this is the moment of truth to see what okay, great. We did it well. So we now have to just make sure that some of the other questions, all the questions we did are fine. So this is the welcome script. We can keep that or we can delete that. For simplicity, I'm just going to delete this. Let's just keep it to the questions. Let's go back to the questions and make sure if you import the questionnaire like that, I just want to make sure that everything is fine. What is your current enrollment status? This is fine. Let's go to the next ones. Before today, have you heard of ChatGPT? That looks fine. Which of the following ways have you used ChatGPT in the past 12 months? That looks fine too. On average, how much time do you spend on ChatGPT each day? So they enter the value and they select the units, which we just created. Let's make some changes to the settings there so that we don't want people typing. If you want to prevent people from typing, like values or text, you can click on select only numbers so that way the system prevents individuals from typing that. So that's how you can use the settings to reduce entries or illogical entries or errors being entered into your data. Because even though you wanted a number, some people could enter 5 or enter letters, and that you don't have to now start cleaning the data. So once you do that, that prevents people from doing that. So that's why you have that button there. And then let's look at the rest of the question. In the past term, which of the following courses have you used ChatGPT for? So great, we have it as a multiple response question. How long have you been using ChatGPT for any applications or purposes? You have to enter the number, and then they can select the units of measurements. Next, on average, would you say your grades in the last academic session were mostly which letter grades? Let's edit this to make sure that if the user clicks on other, then the system allows them to provide an open-ended text. So let's add, these are very special buttons. So let's click on other, and let's just copy what we had here and just paste it here, because this is a special button. This other one was not. So now the system knows that if the user clicks on other, it will allow the user to automatically enter a text there. And then lastly, we have the upload question, which is, please upload the format of your results sheets from the last academic term. So now we have successfully created our questionnaire. We can choose to also include the consent form for our study. So let's do that. Questionnaire, let's add a consent form into the study. This is for adults. Let's generate a default content for our consents, and let's update it. So now we're done with the setup of study. Let's now add the logic. So the logic is the only people eligible for the study are individuals who are first-year college students. So let's go to logic and go to inclusion criteria. Let's set that up. But before we do that, right, let's actually set the survey as longitudinal. Right now, it says blinking just as cross-sectional. So we come here and let's edit the study timeline. We want to change it from cross-sectional to longitudinal. So now that we have done that, these buttons here, the options here have changed. Now, the question is, how many follow-ups do we want outside the baseline survey? So remember that we in our design, we're going to gather this youth, survey them at first year, when they're at the end of their first year, and then we're going to follow them every other year to the fourth year. That means that we have one baseline survey and 3 follow-up surveys. So we're going to say we need 3 follow-ups, because the question is number of follow-ups excluding baseline survey. So baseline survey was in the first year, then we'll follow them in the second year, third year, and fourth year. So that means that we have 3 follow-ups. The interval between follow-ups is it 1 year, 1 month? So let's say 12. We can say we want to have it as 12 months, or you can say 1 year, doesn't matter. Or you can say 360 days, however you want to frame it. So the system knows that, okay, you want us to do 1 baseline survey and then 3 follow-ups. And those follow-ups, each wave of a study should be 12 months apart. So the platform knows that. And the whole idea is that the platform will do these things for you automatically. You don't have to go back to the students every 12 months and say, hey, remember you said you're going to do a questionnaire. No, all of that is completely automated. So when do we want to start our survey? Do we want to start today? Okay, if that's today, the system knows that, okay, this study is going to end on, this is August 22nd, 2028, because we'll have one baseline and 3 follow-ups. And so now we've set our study as a longitudinal study. So let's save the settings. So the settings have been updated, and now our study has been changed from cross-sectional. Now you can see it's longitudinal now. So we can set other logic now. We can say, alrighty, our study is supposed to include only certain people. So let's go to inclusion criteria and set up that inclusion criteria. Now you might want to have a different set of inclusion criteria at baseline versus at follow-up, or you want to have no inclusion criteria, that anybody who is eligible can participate. But in our study, we actually want to set up inclusion criteria for baseline. So let's select the question. What is your current educational status? We are only including individuals who are exactly equal to first-year college students. Those are the only students who are eligible for our study. So at baseline, you must have been in first year. And then everybody who was included at baseline is then eligible for follow-up. So we're going to just set this as our inclusion criteria for the study. This is just telling you, the platform telling you that at the beginning, it's going to tell people that there are screeners in the questionnaire to determine eligibility. So if you want, you can change this language to whatever you want. You can type something else. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to accept that as it is. And then here, for people who are not eligible, maybe they are third-year students or fourth-year students, it's going to tell them you are not eligible to participate. And it's going to display this text. Again, you can change that if you wanted. I'm just going to save and continue. And then for those who are eligible, it will tell them, yeah, you're eligible. So save and include. So now we've set up the inclusion criteria. Again, I only set at baseline because I want to include only individuals who were first-year college students at baseline. I have not set up follow-up criteria because everybody who was eligible at baseline is eligible for follow-up. So I'm not setting up follow-up criteria for that. Then I want to also set up skip patterns. Remember that we asked the individuals, have you ever heard of ChatGPT? Well, if somebody has never heard of ChatGPT, then why are we asking them how many times you use ChatGPT and so on and so forth? So I'm going to come to logic again and go to skip patterns and set up skip patterns and say, this is based on this question. Before today, have you ever heard of ChatGPT? If they say no, then I'm going to route them to the next question that had to do with what they are relevant for. So this will be question, this one here. On average, would you say your grades in the last academic session were mostly which letter grades? So we're going to select that as, for individuals who have never heard of ChatGPT, let's just take them to this question and we can submit that. So, and just like that, we've set up our study as longitudinal. We can do other things like offer incentives if you wanted to. If you wanted to offer incentives, we come to here, and we come to incentives and payments. The question is, do you want to pay everybody, or do you want to offer a raffle draw? A raffle draw might say, okay, they're lucky winners. You have 10 lucky winners. If you're lucky, you can get it. Or do you want to pay everybody? So those are the three options you have. No incentives for everybody, raffle draw for one or a few, or incentive payout for everybody. Let's say I'm feeling, very rich and I want to pay out everybody. And my sample size, I know that, okay, I have 500 people per for the study. I can now select the number of incentives how much I want to pay each person. Let's say $10. Now, the platform knows that this is a longitudinal study. So the kind of data you are asked is based on the design. So now it's asking you, okay, this money you want to pay, do you want to pay everybody at baseline, or do you want to pay baseline participants who sign up for follow-up? Because remember, that's a longitudinal study. At the end of each survey, the platform is going to ask this person, hey, we have a follow-up survey coming. Do you want to participate? So here, this one is saying that if they say yes, then we should say, okay, we're going to pay you for saying yes, right? And giving us your email. This one is saying, we're not going to pay you at follow-up, at baseline, but when we come back next year, we're going to pay you money. So and then here is saying, just pay everybody, pay them at baseline at follow-up, right? Those are all the decisions that you make and of course, the amount of money you're going to pay is determined by what you select, right? And so the platform allows you to be able to select whatever you can afford in terms of incentives, and then you can monitor the disbursements over time from here as well. You can set reminders for people who have not responded. So the idea is that this study is going to be 4 years. You just set everything now, and you can go to sleep, or you can travel to Europe and do whatever you want. And at the end of the study will automatically do everything for you, setting up reminders, collecting follow-up and everything. So the only thing you are doing literally is just this point we're doing now. The rest is completely automated. And so, in a nutshell, this is how we've set up our study. It's always a good idea to preview your study to see how it's going to look like. So let's preview the study, our data, to see what it looks like. Let's start the survey. This is the consent form. We accept. This is the screener questions we have. Let's go next. What is your current enrollment status? Let's say we are in postgraduates. You're not eligible to participate. Why? Because the study is only among individuals who are first-year college students. So let's go back again and try with our correct designation. Start again. Accept. So we're first-year college students. Now we're eligible to participate. Next. Before today, have you heard of ChatGPT? No, I have not heard of ChatGPT. So it has now moved me to the question that is relevant. On average, would you say your grades in the last academic session were mostly what-letter grades? I had other grades. It allows me to enter the value. Or I had Fs, mostly Fs. Next. I provide my results sheets. Next. Now, it says we have a follow-up survey coming up. Do you want to participate? If I say yes, I provide my email and I agree to participate. That's how the platform knows. The platform uses the email as a unique identifier, both as a mechanism to contact the person and also as a unique identifier. And so that the records from the same person are then automatically merged together. So you don't even have to worry about, geez, how do I know, the same individual? Every single thing is done automatically, so that you just have to worry about setting up the data and collecting it. And everything is done automatically. So once you are fine with everything, you can then launch your survey and collect responses. The platform also analyzes the data for you automatically. So if I collected data, so let me run an actual survey now. Let me take a survey. Let me copy this and so let's take this survey now. Next, I'm in first year college. I'm eligible. Yes, I've heard of ChatGPT. So now, since I said yes, of course, it's going to ask me the questions that are relevant for me. I'm just going to select random stuff here. On average, how much time do you spend on ChatGPT? I spend 8 hours daily. In the past, or what courses have I used it for? I've used it for math, for English, for history. How long have you been using ChatGPT? 6 days. On average, will you say your grades? For those who did not use ChatGPT, this was where it brought them from that question of the answer of no. I've been having fantastic grades. ChatGPT has really helped my life. And then next, I provide my email, and let's say that's my email, and I agree to participate. And so it has successfully signed me up for follow-up here. It will now automatically, at the time I have set as the investigator, then go back to this individual and say, hey, wave 2 is here around the corner. Please take the survey. And that is how the system does that. So now I've taken the survey, I can come to manage collected data. I see there's one respondent. Well, surprise, that was me. I can download a report for the study, like the methodology report. Just by clicking on that, the platform takes the metadata for the study and writes up a report for us so that we can see how the study was conducted, the timelines for each wave, and all of that, so that we can, if we're writing the report, we know how to use. So it has finished writing the report. Let's grab that report now. View download history. Let's download the report. So this is the report that has been generated for us. The association between exposure to ChatGPT and academic performance. It provides the context for the background. It talks about the study design. This was the longitudinal design. It talks about the time periods: baseline, follow-up 1, follow-up 2, follow-up 3. Of course, this is the one that is currently ongoing. The rest are pending. It talks about, you have the number of respondents tracked per wave. In this case, just one person. Survey administration, the questionnaire. It talks about the limitations and the strengths of a study that are inherent to the design. So this you can then use in your reports or whatever you're trying to use it for. The same thing with the analysis. The platform also allows you to analyze the data automatically. So we'll just come to download report. And in this case, we'll download it's only baseline we have. So it's only displaying baseline because literally we have only that wave. That is the ongoing wave. So you can't download wave 1 or follow-up 1 when you've not even gotten there yet. So the only thing we can download now is baseline because we are currently in baseline. We can download for a subset, or we can download for the whole population, as the case might be, and that allows us to do that accordingly. And so those are some of the ways that the platform allows. Okay, let's just look at the reports quickly. View download history. Let's look at the analysis report. That is downloaded as well. So this is the analysis report. The association between exposure to ChatGPT and academic performance. This current cycle for the analysis is baseline because we are currently in baseline. The analyzed population is 1 person. Well, I only had 1 response. And so for each question, it takes it and analyzes it. The platform knows the appropriate statistical methods to apply for each question. And all of that is done automatically. Of course, this analysis are not interesting because I just have 1 participant. So there's nothing interesting going on here. But essentially, this is how the platform allows you to collect data for longitudinal data, analyze it, generate your reports, and all of that instantaneously. All right, I have been talking enough. So let's see if you have. I'm going to stop here and take any questions that you have. So if you have questions, please just let me first check the box. And then once. All right. Okay, no questions in the box. So if you have questions, you can kindly raise up your hand, and we'll ask you to ask your question in the order in which the hands are appearing on my screen. So any questions? Okay, Adeleke Mistura.
Dr. Gakwe, I'm back.
Oh, okay. Oh, awesome. Great. All right, great. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. Looking at the way you have done this, can this be applied to plants? For example, I want to check insect plants interaction, or let me say insect pest management. How can this be used?
That's a great question. So yes, you can use it for any data collection, but in this case, for example, the plants are not the one answering, but you are the one collecting data on the same plants longitudinally, right? So in that case, what you would do is to come here. Let's pause the survey. So so each plant you might have a unique ID for each plant. Let's say you have a tag for each plant. So you include a tag number as part of a question, so that in each wave you are collecting data on the tag, because the plants cannot talk for themselves. So that's how you can identify or link together the responses through a unique identifier. But in this case, since you are the one collecting the data for all of them, you'd come here, and under the study settings, you would come to multiple entries. So it says choose yes to allow the same individual to submit multiple completed questionnaires, or no to disallow it. By default it's no, but in your case, you're going to say yes, because you are going to collect data for all the plants. So you finish for one plant, you collect the next one, right? And then when the follow-up comes, you're going to now start collecting the data again. So those are the two changes you have to make. You have to, first of all, make sure that you include on each plant or each animal, there's a unique identifier for each. That could be a tag that you apply to the plant or whatever, but that is very critical for you to be able to link the plants across time, so that you know that each plant has that same unique identifier across all waves. So that's how you're going to do it.
So thanks, Dr. Kaku. There's also a question. What about exploratory study?
Exploratory study is not a type of design. Exploratory study simply means that you are just exploring, right? So yes, you can use it for exploratory studies. Sometimes exploratory studies might be pilot studies. And so in that case, you would come to here, and under the main study, you can either select as main study or pilot study. But the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that exploratory study is not a very well-defined research design per se. So you have to define what exactly you want, but essentially it can be anything under the sun. It can be cross-sectional survey, it can be anything. But yeah, you can still use the platform to collect any kind of data you are interested in.
Abishoye.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well done, Prof.
Thank you.
It's a very good investment, and I really appreciate it. I have two questions, really.
Okay.
So the first one, I want to find out where we can classify cross-sectional analytical studies. Because I know at times when you do descriptive studies, and then you have maybe you now want to find out association maybe between sex and then maybe your outcome variables. So, and then at that time, now it's not purely descriptive, but you are kind of creating groups within the supposedly one population that you have. How do we, in the study design, where exactly can we place that?
That's a good question. It's still a cross-sectional study. The fact that you now created groups from it doesn't make it any analytical. So there's no such thing as a cross-sectional analytical study. You have analytical studies, cohort, case control, randomized trials, and all the other ones at the bottom are, descriptives. So the fact that you are using it for something that was not intended for by design doesn't necessarily make it the fact that a butterfly can fly doesn't make it a bird, can it? So it's still a descriptive study.
A descriptive study. Okay, thank you very much. Then there's a second question. Now, somebody approached me. He wanted to needed some clarification. they are doing a study among pregnant women, and they actually wanted to find out an outcome on their neonates. So now it's collecting the data on the mothers first, but the second outcome is going to be on the neonates. So now, do we call it, because now you are going to taking two sets of measurements now, but not on the same mother. So is it a cross-sectional, or you say that, okay, because the neonate is still, they are offspring of the mother, is it a core study that you are following them, or like we have two in one cross-sectional studies?
So I'll ask you another question too, so that you can answer that question yourself. If I did let's say I design a cross-sectional study, and I'm collecting measurements from individuals, but on each individual, I'm also interested in, I'm a dentist, so I'm interested in, okay, I will also examine each tooth from that person and capture, so I'm capturing both individual level assessments, right? But also I'm capturing their individual teeth records, like tooth number 1, does it have caries? Is it colored? Does that change the design, in your opinion, from what you can understand about epidemiology?
Well, it's definitely from the same person. It shouldn't. But the only thing sorry, sir, because the outcome is like, okay, we want to find out, I can't place exactly, we didn't go into specifics. But like, okay, the mother, okay, let's look at, for example, malaria and pregnancy. I want to find out that maybe the mother's exposure, does it predict, the neonates coming down with malaria? So you have taken your first set of measurement on the mothers, but now you are checking their neonates, their newborns. So I just want to be clear. So what do we call that study design now?
The measurements have nothing.
Yes,
the measurements have nothing to do with the design, right? The design is influenced by, like in your case, right? There are so many scenarios that could happen. Scenario number 1, I'm designing a cross-sectional study. I come to the house, right? And my inclusion criteria is women who just gave birth. So I come to the house, I ask.
Sorry, sir. This was started from the pregnant woman. We want to follow them up. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Oh, I see. So you have baseline. You follow the woman over time, right? And so you are trying to see. So you're trying to see. Are you trying to? So do you have different exposure statuses? Like, let's say women who were exposed to certain things, or women who were not exposed?
No, just women. The same sets that are pregnant. And then we now want to see an outcome in their newborns.
Okay.
So we took our baselines. We collect our baseline data and to characterize the women. And then the second set of measurement is on their newborns, not them again.
Yeah. So that's a panel study, essentially. So remember that, going back to the previous slide I showed you, right? A panel, a panel is just a group of individuals who may have the same characteristic. Unlike a cohort study where we're looking at distinctively exposed versus non-exposed. Now, if you had said we're comparing pregnant women with diabetes versus those without diabetes and seeing how the outcomes in their children changes or differs, that would make it a cohort, prospective cohort. In this case, you are not necessarily interested in a distinction between the women. You're just like interested in all pregnant women, from what I hear from you, right? And you're just trying to say, okay, we know there's no exposure group per se. We're just collecting all pregnant women, following them over time, and then collecting the outcomes and trying to see, just like in an exploratory context, saying, well, when we collect the data, we're going to see what we can analyze, right? Maybe we're interested in, maybe we're even interested in diabetes status, but we did not follow them by exposure status. We just collected all pregnant women, followed them over time, and then we collected data. That would be panel data. That is classic panel data.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just read some questions that were asked earlier. How do you get the online forms to the subject?
You get it by many ways. You can copy the link and share with them via let's say, on however you want to share with them. Like, I could, for example, copy this link and drop it with you guys here on the chat, right? That's one way to do it. I could have a QR code. Let's say I have a huge signboard or billboard. I want people to scan the QR code. I could do that as well. I can share on social media, on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, whatever, right? Those are social media shares. Or if I have emails for the people, I can decide to upload their email. So I click here and say I want to upload their, maybe let's say I have a whole spreadsheet with emails. I can upload from file and then customize the messages they are going to get. So once I upload, I can say, this is the message that will be delivered to the individuals. Now, on the Chisquares platform, the beautiful thing here is that you can choose to specify the messages for each wave, or you can say, just deliver the same email to all the waves. So I might want to say, okay, wave one, I want to say, hey, thanks so much, guys, for participating in wave one, but I want to customize the messages for each wave. So that when you upload emails for participants, you have the option to say, use the same message for all waves, or use different messages for each wave. If you're going to say use the same message for all waves, you can just simply say, all right, let's click here to generate the content, and the platform will automatically send the emails to everybody in that email you uploaded. Whether it's 10,000 emails or 1 million emails, the platform will send messages. If you want to use a different message for each wave, then in our study, we have baseline survey, follow-up 1, follow-up 2, follow-up 3. You specify each wave and customize the message accordingly, and the platform will automatically send the message that you have created to the participants when the time arrives. I hope that makes sense to whoever asked the question.
I believe so.
Great.
Felix?
All right, Prof, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Last week, I launched a survey, but there's no response up to now. How do I go about it? I launched a survey, I gave it a 1-week time lag, and the time has lapsed, and there is no response. How do I go about it?
Did you send this? Did you invite anybody to participate in the survey?
Oh, no.
So I'm very curious. How did you imagine they're going to take the survey?
Yeah, I went through the Chisquares platform. So I put in my questionnaire and every other thing. So after that, I set the time schedule for 1 week, and eventually I launched it.
Okay, that's okay. So but you understand how it is. Like you are the investigator, you are the one who
Yes.
knows what your study population is, right?
Yes.
So there's no way the platform will know who your study participants is or are. So there's no way for it to just like magically send the survey to them. So you would have to. So what you have to do is you go to share survey, this button here. So you log into your survey, click on share survey, and you can now either copy the link and send it to them, or if you have emails, you can upload their emails and draft the message, and the platform will send to them, right? So that's how you send messages. That's how you send surveys on the platform. Does that make sense?
Thank you. All right. Thank you
And
so much.
then you can now track, when you now do all of that, you can then track the participants. You can now see, okay, this is the response rates for my participants in this survey. You can see that over time for your respective study.
All right, Prof.
You're welcome.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Yeah.
All right, Lungi, the next
Okay,
question.
let me just, yes, sorry, let me read another one. What's the difference between piping questions and skip patterns?
A pipe allows you to, like the name implies, pipe things. A pipe, think of what a pipe does, right? A pipe carries water from one area to another area. So a piping question allows you to funnel answers that may have been provided from an earlier question into a subsequent one. So let's create a piping question so that it's more explanatory that way. So let's say in our survey here, we want to add a piping question. So let's click on that. We add a piping question. And we say, you indicated, so when asked about whether you had ever used ChatGPT, your answer was blank. Now, we asked them about whether they used ChatGPT earlier. We want to pipe whatever answer they provided from up there into this question, right? And so we will then select the question from which we want to pipe the answer from. So let's select the question here. This was, before today, have you ever heard of ChatGPT? This is the question we want to pipe answers from. So we'll select that question. And let's type a label for this. The label is what the variable name will later on become. So let's call this, let's say pipe, right? So, and then the ending part of our question is, please explain or please provide an explanation for this answer. This is just a toy example, but and let's use the same ending for all options by clicking this box. So now, if we look at this question now, it's going to read, when asked about whether you had ever used ChatGPT, your answer was yes. For the individual who said yes. For the individual who said no, the answer will be, when asked about whether you had ever used ChatGPT, your answer was no. For those who said maybe, not sure, the answer will accordingly be that. So piping and then you can then create the answer options here, whatever they are. So a pipe allows you to pipe answers from a previous question into a current one. Skip pattern is all about skipping a question. We don't want, if you answered so-and-so to the previous question, we don't want you to answer this next set of questions at all. We want you to skip them to the next question or to the end of a survey, however we might want to do. So I hope you can now understand the difference between piping things into something and skipping over something. So those are all parts of survey logic.
Thanks, Dr. Gaku. Wisdom? Wisdom Macquarie? Okay. Okay. All right, he has lowered his hand. When does it make sense to limit the entries based on exclusion criteria or based on a specific number of participants per group?
Limits the entries. I'm trying to understand the context for that question so I supply the right answer. Are you saying limit the number of participants? Or are you saying, so if you can provide a little more context. Can the person just unmute themselves and ask the question?
If you're still here, please just raise your hand.
Well, I'm trying to figure out whether you're talking about quotas or what exactly you're referring to. I don't want to give you a wrong answer relative to the question you've asked.
All right. Please raise your hand and then we will unmute your mic. Here's another question. Is there an option for quiz here so one can gather responses periodically?
So you can set it up. You can set up a question however you want in terms of because in general you can. The whole point of a quiz is to see how individuals answered at the end of the survey, like what the responses were. So if that is what you are trying to do, you can achieve that in the settings by coming here and saying post-survey response view, right? So they can see the responses that were provided by the individuals. So that is one option you could explore if that was what you were intending to do with that. So you can explore that from the settings.
I would like to know the name of the formula Chi-Squares uses to determine sample size on the platform when one has set all the parameters. Can we use the name displayed on the sample calculations result alongside?
So traditionally, these formulas do not have names. That question has been asked. I think we've answered that question in the previous session, or maybe it's a different individual. Not everything in science has a name. So these are fairly classic standard formulae or formulas. So you can just say sample size calculation for the survey or whichever study you were doing was computed with the formula below, right? And that should suffice. And then you can provide what the parameters are for the formula. that should more than enough suffice for whatever use case you're trying to do.
Okay. What happens when the questions in the follow-up are different from the baseline?
So if the questions are different from baseline, I mean, you can always edit your survey. So whenever you're doing the survey, you can pause the survey and edit the survey. But in general, asking different questions in a context of a cohort study is not really ideal. The whole idea is to collect the same measures at different points in time, so you can see, how does differ. When you change the instrument, when you change a construct in the middle of a study, longitudinal study, it means that you can no longer compare the data before versus after, because there's a change in methodology. Any comparisons you're doing now, you're comparing apples to oranges, right? So you really want to avoid that, actually. You want to avoid changing an instrument right smack in the middle of a study. But if you want to do that, of course, you can do it. We allow you to do anything you want to do. You can just pause the study as it is paused and make whatever changes you want to make. And those changes will be implemented immediately. Obviously, if data has already been collected, it's been collected already. But that wave going forward, those changes will be implemented. But like I said, that's something you really want to avoid, because it makes for data comparability very hard, because there's now a change in methodology and you cannot compare the data points before versus after that change.
Thank you. Can you explain more on prevalence equals incidence times duration? Does it mean increase in duration increases both prevalence and incidence?
Well, increase in incidence, as you said, incidence is already increased, but increase in incidence will increase prevalence, because there are some diseases that the duration is the lifespan. So think of HIV, for example. If you have HIV, the duration of HIV is the lifespan of the individual, right? Compare that to a condition like flu. You might have flu for just a week. Or there are some conditions that you might have just for one day. Maybe you have an allergic reaction that lasts just one day. So that means that if you're looking at the prevalence of a condition in the population, you got to factor in the duration of a condition. If we're talking about HIV, for example, once somebody has it, well, they will always be counted in the prevalence for as long as they live, right? So that if you found a way of reducing the duration of HIV, let's say that this magical pill that comes that cures you after 10 years, right? That means that we've reduced the duration of HIV from the lifespan to 10 years. So that the prevalence of HIV will start reducing, because we have reduced the duration of the condition, right? So in a case where we have, for example, let's say, sticking with the example of HIV, even if we had no new cases, right? If we had no new cases and everybody's immortal, nobody dies. That's an extreme example, but let's stick with that example. So in this case, we have reduced the incidence is not changing, or it has been reduced to the barest minimum. The prevalence will still continue to be the same, because the duration is the lifespan, right? So if we reduce duration and reduce incidence, the prevalence changes. If we reduce the prevalence, the incidence of a disease, the prevalence changes. If we reduce the duration of a disease, the prevalence changes, because prevalence is a function of both the incidence and the duration of the condition. I hope that is clear.
If this question was also asked verbally, how can we design a survey for insect growth under laboratory condition by varying growth with temperature?
I think we've answered it. The same principle applies to the previous question.
All right. Uwem Ekan name. You may unmute yourself, Uwem.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Agaku. This is very, very interesting and very enlightening. Now, can you have a cohort study in retrospect?
Yes, you can have a retrospective cohort, yes.
Okay, so I have a situation here. Now, looking at poultry factory workers in 1980, and I want to see how many of them developed cancers by the year 2000 and let's say 2000. That's like 20 years, right? Some of them are not alive, but I have their relatives that I can call, maybe their wives, their children. I have their phone numbers of their contacts that I can call to find out, oh, this person had died, but did this person ever develop a cancer in the person's lifetime? Would I call that a retrospective cohort study?
So,
Is it correct that, yeah?
So there are many ways you can design the study, right? So in this case, the only problem is that you don't have an exposure group. You don't have exposure. You have poultry farmers, right, as one exposure group. But what is the control group? Like, who are the non-exposed group?
Okay.
So
I would say,
Mhm.
but I don't have a control group there.
In a cohort study, you must have two groups, right? You have exposed and non-exposed. So your research question could be that are poultry farmers, do they have a higher incidence or have a higher likelihood of developing certain cancers compared to, for example, cattle farmers, right? So the exposure status, individuals who are poultry farmers, maybe your hypothesis is that there's something about these chickens that just increases your incidence. And so you are either comparing them to another group or you're comparing them to the general population who are not poultry farmers. So it's poultry farmers versus the general population. That could be one, right? So you are trying to compare the incidence rates for that outcome in the poultry farmers versus the general population. Now, yes, that would be a cohort because you have two groups that you're comparing, right? But you can also choose to say, for that kind of study design, a better fit will be a case control study where you look at individuals you already have the outcome, which is the cancer. And case control studies are built for scenarios where we have a rare outcome and most cancers are rare outcomes, right? So we have individuals who have already developed the cancers, right? And we're trying to see what is it about what exposure increases your likelihood of getting certain cancers. So we look at, for example, so in this case, we'll fetch records of all the cases that have cancer, right? We'll look at non-cancer cases. Let's say we'll go to a particular ward, look at individuals who have who came for, let's say, a routine health check, a wellness check at the hospital. We get those records, right? And we're trying to now see how do the cases, individuals with cancer, compared to a controls, which are the individuals we grabbed from the wellness visits, right? In terms of their exposure status. So we'll now try to look at these individuals, if we can ask their relatives, because I say you're trying to capture that data. Their relatives. Now, like, did this individual, was he a poultry farmer? Like, no, he was not. What kind of exposures did he have? Where did he live? What did he do? Right? And you're not trying to, so you have data, the same questionnaire for the people who had the cancer, and the same questionnaire, right, for the individuals who are your controls. At the end of the day, you're done trying to compare, it seems most of these people who have cancer reported being poultry farmers. I only have two people who among the controls who reported being poultry farmers. So you can then say that, wow, the odds of reporting of reporting being a case or having cancer are 10 times higher among poultry farmers compared to individuals, or that poultry farmers have 10 times higher odds of reporting of having a case of interest, which is cancer, compared to the control group. So in that case, I would say that a case control study would be an easier setup for you to do. But of course, the challenge is that, like, you are relying on relatives, like how well do they have the knowledge of exposure, like how was the quality of the data. So issues of misclassification and recall bias start creeping in, right? Especially for cases, individuals who cases in this case, their relatives will be more curious. They will provide more keen answers that, they start wondering what it was that made this person die. And so the answers might just be different from the controls versus the cases. But in general, in a nutshell, I'll say that for your use case, a case control study will be better designed for what you have in mind.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let me just go back to the chat box. Thank you for an insightful presentation, Prof. Does the platform have a provision that allows downloading of the research data in Microsoft Excel format for analysis or other statistical software such as R or Stata, or on QSR and Vivo or Atlas TI for qualitative data?
Yeah, of course. You can download the data here. You just come to manage collected data and you come to data access and insights. The platform automatically cleans your data for you. So you can choose to download the clean data sets, or you can choose to download the raw data sets and do the manual cleaning yourself. So yeah, you can, either way, you can download however you want.
Thank you. Okay, so Rahimat provided more clarity on the question. I mean, can survey questions be set as quiz with allocated marks such that you can have a student's performance score in total?
Oh, I see your point. Okay, yeah. So that's we've considered integrating that, but since the Chisquares platform is more geared towards research, we decided that we'll prioritize other things. But if that's something that is in demand, we can easily integrate it back into the platform. So no, for now we do not support that, but it's a very low-hanging fruit. It's challenging at all to build that. But again, most of our audience are just researchers, and that was a bit tangential. But again, we'll consider incorporating the quiz modes into the platform.
Okay. Any other questions? Did I miss any questions? Thanks a lot to my teammates who helped me today with the questions and the links. So did I miss anything else? I have a cohort of children with blindness enrolled for inclusive education and want to conduct a study to assess the impact on their lives. Would you recommend a case control or cohort using their classmates?
So your study is defined actually not by the population, the study population. So always think of PICO, right? The framework in this case, so let's go to the end of this. Let me create a slide here. Jeez, how do I create this? So what you always, you want to really keep PICO in mind at all times. That allows you to frame your studies very elegantly. Let me increase this. So here, the P is your population, I is intervention, C is control, O is outcome, and T is time. Your population in this case is individuals who are blind, right? That is what your, so let's look at the elements of PICO here quickly. How come we're having that sound? I've never heard that sound before.
Yeah, same here.
That's it's very extremely distracting. So the population is individuals who are blind, or people living with blindness. Your intervention, you don't have an intervention because intervention can only belongs to experiments. So instead, you have an exposure group. So exposure is educational intervention, you're right? It's now, in this case, I'm not sure whether it's it's an experimental study, because it could be an experiment where you are randomizing some of the blind kids to a particular education and others to another education. So let's say you are going to do homeschooling, where we're going to school you at home, and we're going to randomize the other group to, let's say, a school for the blind. If that's what you're doing, then that's an experiment. So in that case, we actually have an I here, which is intervention. So intervention is homeschooling, for example, versus special school for the blind. Now, if that's what you're doing, this is no longer a cohort study. This is now a randomized trial, right? Because in this case, once you intervene, remember, interventional studies are where you, the investigator, you are intervening. You're not just observing. A cohort study is an observational study. So if you, in this case, are assigning treatment, you're the one saying, I'm going to randomize you to homeschooling, and I'm going to randomize you to special school for the blind, then that's no longer a cohort study, right? It is now an experiment. It's a randomized trial. And so the intervention is homeschooling. The control is, individuals who go for special school for the blind. The outcome is academic performance. Or whatever indicator you want to use. And the time is, let's say you want to have a 2-year observation or 4-year, with 6-month follow-up, right? In this case, the fact that by the virtue of the fact that you assign treatment, it is no longer observational. It's now an experiment. It's now a randomized trial. So I hope that is clear. So the crux of this issue will be whether what happened here, right? Was this an exposure that was determined by you, the investigator, or was it determined by nature or by, So that's what will determine us to know whether it's a cohort study or an experiment. This particular one here, where you're the one who assigned treatment. I hope that is clear.
Thank you. Ayo?
Okay, good day, sir. My questions are there published studies that use the Chi-square platform for survey and analysis? And then following from that, if the answer is yes, can we have their DOI links to see how those studies conducted, their work? Thank you.
The Chisquares platform is currently being used for several studies around the world. We don't track studies that are using it. So if you want to use it, if you want to find that information, you can search the literature, and so that would be the best way for you to get that information. Okay, next question.
It seems we've answered all. What if you find both groups? What if you find both groups already set up, i.e. homeschoolers and special schoolers? Does it still remain a RCT or it becomes a cohort?
If you met them that way, remember that intervention, I means you are intervening, right? You are intervening. If you're not intervening, but you just met them that way, then remember, going back to our previous slide, did the investigators assign people into the study groups? If it is no, then that's an observational study. If it is yes, then it's an interventional. So remember, intervention, you are intervening. Intervening means, you are involved. You are saying, oh, you take this, you take that. Observational is you met them that way. You are just observing. That's why we call it observational, because you are just observing, right? So if you met them that way, then it's no longer an experiment. It's an observational study.
All right. They're enrolled in normal school back in 2009. Okay. Are there any other questions? There's no need for coding before the raw analysis.
No, the platform automatically does all of that for you. And that's why you can download both the clean data set and the raw data set. So the whole point of the Chisquares platform is to automate things that are just mechanical and just purely just raw energy, just raw work. That things that can be automated are automated. So, but like I said earlier, for those who want to suffer, we provide you with both the raw data sets and the clean data set. Right? But all of that is already done by the platform automatically. But if you want to download the raw data set and clean it yourself, obviously that's also your choice.
Wow. Okay, can I provide more details about the children? Nasiru, Nasiru, you may need to unmute yourself and speak so you can ask your question fully. The survey link was posted, Wim. They will post it again. My team members will post it again.
Look, I'm sure we can figure out what that's. I'm sure there has to be a setting to mute that. It's pretty annoying.
We solve one problem and we get another one. I managed to solve the problem of those lines, and now we have a new problem. Okay, Marcus.
Maybe your solution was world class.
Okay, Marcus. Marcus, your hand is up. Dr. Ada, do you have a question?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, this is Marcus. Outstanding presentation. Dr. Waku, can you please clarify this concept for me? If I have a cohort of people that are in the same setting, let's say in the hospital, they require hospitalization, or they happen to have a disease at the start of the study, they all have characteristics. And I'm using an administrative database to go retrospectively and look at certain risk factors or exposures that these patients had at the beginning of the time of entry into the study. Let's say 5 years ago, they all had the same characteristics at the time of hospitalization due to an acute condition. And I followed these patients in time to look at for the outcomes at 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year. Is this study a cohort study with a retrospective design? Is this a case control study according to what you have taught us today? Thank you very much.
All right. So here are the scenario. So you have individuals. I'm hearing a very annoying echo. Longitudinal, can you investigate why I'm having that echo? Okay, I think it's gone. All right, great. So we have individuals in a hospital. I want to reconstruct the scenario so that we're answering the right question. Individuals, let's say individuals with tuberculosis, or let's say with cancer. Let's stick with the cancer example, right? And so here we're just interested in what factors were associated with these individuals having this outcome, which is cancer, right? What are the predictors? What factors were associated? In that case, what we have is this is just exploratory, right? Because we don't have a clear hypothesis in mind. Let's go back to this screen here. One of the things we are very interested. The name here, analytical, means that there is a hypothesis. It is hypothesis driven, right? It's not just saying, oh, we're going to look under the sun and see what may have caused them to, there is a clear distinction into groups, exposed or non-exposed, right? We are pursuing hypotheses when we look at analytical studies, right? Now, let's go back to the case study we have, right? Folks with cancer, we're just trying to see what may have caused these guys to have cancer. What are the factors? In that research question, as it stands now, that is just a case series, right? Remember, a case series is when we have, let's go back to right here. So case series. Think of a case, and we've used case series extensively in the past few years since COVID-19. You have data sets that have individuals that were diagnosed with COVID-19, and we've been analyzing data, right? The US CDC and the EU CDC had tons of data sets like that, where we have individuals who have a COVID. These were only people who tested positive for COVID-19. Each day, they will have extensive data just put out, like this individual tested for COVID-19. This was the family history, this was their whatever. We take that data set and we're trying to analyze it, right? That is a case series. It's a case series because it's a data set that has cases, a whole bunch of them. That's why we call it series, because it's not just one case. There are many, many cases. And we're trying to see, oh, what factors are associated with a mild case of COVID-19 or a serious case, or what factors are associated with actually mortality from COVID-19, right? So in that case, that's a case series. Why? Because our data set has a whole bunch of cases in it, not just one, a whole bunch of them. Only people who have COVID are in that data set. There is no hypothesis. It's not driven by hypothesis. It's not as if we have some hypothesis that says exposure to so and so, let's say individuals who are, like, I can't even think of any groups now, right? But there's no hypothesis driving that. This is a case series. So that's one possible scenario for your question. Scenario number 2, you are interested in saying individuals who lived in houses that had asbestos would have a higher risk for cancer. Same scenario, right? But different question now. This question now is hypothesis driven because we have a clear hypothesis in mind. We're saying that we believe from evidence that asbestos exposure is associated with risk of lung cancer. And so our study in this hospital, we have a whole bunch of cases, the same data set that we had before. Nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is the question now. The question then is, can we believe from this data set that there's an association between asbestos exposure and cancer? Again, same data set, same individuals in the data set. The only thing that has changed now is the question. Now our question is different because we're not just saying what are factors associated with, with this cancer. We are saying, is there an association between exposure to asbestos and lung cancer? Now, what we have to do now is that we have to go back in time and reconstruct a history of this exposure, right? We'll go back 10 years and see, oh, these individuals, did they live in an asbestos house? What kind of occupation did they have, right? And then we can now say, oh, wow, okay, this individual, I can see 10 years ago, he lived in a house that had asbestos. He lived there for 3 years. These other individuals, there's no record that they live in this kind of houses, right? And then we're looking at the case notes. We can see that this guy who lived here developed cancer 5 years ago. This one developed, and we're trying to reconstruct that timeline as if we were there at the beginning, right? Now, in this case, this is now a retrospective cohort. It's a cohort because we have a well-defined hypothesis and we have clear exposure groups, exposed or non-exposed in terms of asbestos exposure. And that research question has a well-defined, well-defined hypothesis. Now, if we chose that same research question, we now have a different approach to it. We say, all right, we have this community of individuals. Maybe we have a cement factory near our house or in this particular area. We suspect that these fumes and these gases from this cement factory lead to exposure to these poisonous gases that will cause cancer. And so we want to gather all those individuals who live around the 10-mile radius of that factory. And then we want to go to a whole different community that lives extremely far away. And want to follow these individuals for the next 10 years to see which one of them would develop lung cancer. And at the end of the 10 years, we want to compare the lung cancer incident rates among the exposed, defined as people living near that factory, versus non-exposed. You see, the same data, we end up, of course, this is now a prospective cohort study, same research question, but a different approach. So in a nutshell, the design will depend on what the question is, right? The same data set can be answered with in different ways. So the dog always wags the tail. The research question will determine how and what the design is. So we can't just know upfront just by saying, here is the data set we have, what kind of design it is. It's always about what is the question we're asking, and can we even answer that question? So sometimes we can say, oh, we cannot answer that question with a retrospective cohort because we just don't have good quality data to come up with this timeline of exposures. So we can't do an analytical study. How about we just analyze data exploratorily, right? This is just going to be an exploratory analysis of this study. And in that case, we're just going to call it the case series. I hope that answers your question. This is a very long-winded answer, but the point is that it's based on context. And I see your hand is up again, Marcus.
Thank you very much for that beautiful explanation. Let me just rephrase the question as a hypothesis-driven PICO question. Okay. I have a population of patients with COVID-19 diagnosed at the beginning of the pandemic. I would like to answer whether the people that had an older adults measured as a above 65 plus versus younger adults less than 65 have a higher risk of developing long COVID. And the big issue here is if I follow through from 2020 until 2024, let's say that I cut the database today, I go backwards on all the people that had an identified COVID diagnosis, there are some patients that could have gone from 64 to 65 throughout my period of observation. How will I manage those? If I understood correctly, this is a retrospective cohort study that I followed throughout time, but the time already passed. This is already 2020 to 24. And then there is kind of a crossover among some patients potentially that move from one group to the other throughout the time of the exposure. How would you address this issue?
So in general, I wonder what causes that terrible echo. In general, age is not generally an exposure group in a classic epidemiology study design. So we're always looking at some kind of we can use age as an effect modifier, but when we talk about exposures in general, we're always talking about some external exposure, or it could be external, it could be internal, but not necessarily like age, right? So in that case, when we're interested in how does let's say the manifestation of a condition change with time, that is just what we're asking is, what is the natural history of this disease, right? So issues about age are deeply tied with the natural progression. And why? Because, well, as people progress, they get older, all right? And so that's not the best use case for a cohort study, right? That's why we have case series. That's why we have registries. That's the whole reason why we design registries, to see how, as time changes, how does the natural history of a disease progress, right? Because here we're interested in interaction between time and many other things, right? So again, this is one of the issues that the fact that a question can be answered with one particular approach doesn't necessarily mean that it may be the best approach to answer it with, right? So our job then, as researchers, is to just figure out what makes the most sense in terms of that design, right? So in the case of your data set, and again, right, another principle to also keep in mind is it's the fact that you remember that, you might think that you are making your study more robust by calling it a fancy name. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is well defended against threats to validity, because there are so many assumptions. You're going back over time. The quality of the data is not so clear-cut. So in sometimes it's just easy to just say, we have this data set, we're just going to do an exploratory analysis. When we have money and time, we're going to design a prospective study to look at the issues we are interested in. So again, it's all dependent on context and the quality of the data we will eventually get. So based on those decisions, we can decide what is most appropriate and what is most feasible given the resources we have. Okay. Any other question, Lungile? Or are we all set?
Marcus, are you happy?
No further questions. I'm very happy with the answer. I just got a little bit concerned because if my hypothesis is that older age is associated with the developing of long COVID, then age is definitely one of the factors that I cannot modify at the beginning. Like I cannot modify race, I cannot modify the ethnicity. And if I still want to answer a question related to this, my hypothesis was still older adults are at higher risk of developing this disease, so that I can identify a group of people to really see at the beginning, how can I screen for them to make me do an intervention. So my study starts with a cohort followed in time. So I think your answers were very, very nicely done, and that I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also another important instrument you can use is the concept of effect modification. Effect modification is simply saying, is the association between an exposure and an outcome different in this group versus that group, right? we use effect modification when we're interested in biological relationships. So I may be interested in the relationship between, for example, occupational exposure and lung cancer. And my hypothesis that I just feel that this relationship, for whatever reason, there's a biological reason to believe that this relationship is worse among older adults than younger ones, right? That is where we always explore biological, like effect modification. It's all about testing the relationship within different strata, where we look at older adults, younger adults, or males versus females. And the whole point of looking at, effect modification is to see whether there are biological relationships that we should be aware of, because that might influence care or treatment, or the way we design medications or drugs or things of that nature. All right. Any other questions, Longile, in chats or otherwise? All right, none.
Oh, no questions. Didn't realize I was muted.
Okay.
No questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All participants appreciate your responses and the presentation.
Okay, so
Thank you.
next week, let's look at the curriculum for next week. So we are done with this design of longitudinal studies. So next week, we're going to talk about, next week's topic is very technical. I'm not sure. Creation of weights. So, well, it's